You might not remember when you started treating yourself more like a project instead of a person. But if you've ever caught that voice in your head, the one that tracks every mistake, monitors everyone's reactions in the room, and the voice that just never ever lets you rest, then you already know that something is probably off. Today, I want to share one yoga teaching and one very small practice that has helped me to start treating myself more like a person again instead of a project. I'm Tanya, and this is Neurodivergent Yoga. And it usually starts with a lot of good intentions, right? Because we want to feel better. We want to understand ourselves better. We want to work with our brains and our bodies instead of fighting against them all of the time. And that is so reasonable. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just us wanting some steadiness, stability, peace in our lives that often feel a lot harder than they look from the outside. But at some point, this can start to shift, and it stops being about what would help us to feel more steady, more grounded, more healthy, more happy. And it becomes this whole plan of how to correct ourselves, how to mold and shape ourselves into someone who is easier to like, someone who's easier to love, and somebody maybe even who's easier to live with. And maybe, like me, you've tried all the meditation apps, the habit apps, the focus apps, the planners, the journals, the morning routines, all the stuff, the whole system, all of this stuff that we are sold to hack and optimize ourselves. And at one point in my life, I was using another app to manage all of these other apps that I had that I couldn't even keep track of. It was so overwhelming. And I didn't even stop to think maybe the problem isn't that I actually need more apps in my life. I need something different, because we are constantly being sold on this image of the optimized person, the person who wakes up at 5 a.m., who follows all the routines, who keeps up with everyone else, and everything looks all nice and shiny because that's what we're supposed to want. We're supposed to, do all these things and look good doing them. And so what can start as self-care very quickly becomes self-improvement. And then self-improvement can also very quickly then morph into self-correction. And self-correction becomes this running commentary in our heads that never really shuts off. At first, I think it can feel like protection, like we're just staying on top of things, all these things that we're supposed to be doing all of the time. But what happens if we're doing this long enough, what happened to me is that this protection then becomes punishment. And we don't always notice it happening because this voice in our head telling us that we need to optimize ourselves to be good enough starts to sound really normal. But here's what I was missing. And this part for me is what changed everything. In yoga, there's a teaching called Ahimsa. And Ahimsa translates to non-harming or non-violence. And when a lot of us first learn about Ahimsa, if you have spent any time in the yoga world, it very often is taught as being kind to other people. Don't hurt anyone else or any other living things. And yes, of course, that matters. I try to do that in my own life. But Ahimsa, as I learned over time, doesn't only point outwards. It also asks us to look at how we treat ourselves. And this is where a lot of us, too many of us as neurodivergent people, can get caught, I think. Because the voice in our heads it might not sound cruel at first. It might not sound like it's harmful. It can sound really responsible. It can sound really reasonable. It might sound like accountability, taking care of ourselves, taking care of other people. And we start correcting ourselves many times before anyone else gets a chance. We might start treating ourselves like a project. And so this can happen when every time we replay a mistake from 3 years ago while we're trying to fall asleep, right? If you've been there like me, you know this all too well. Every time we call ourselves lazy when we're just actually exhausted and we need a break. Every time we refuse to rest because we haven't earned it yet. Every time we look in the mirror and the first thought that we have is not a kind one. It's a cruel one or a harmful one. That is harm to ourselves. And it's very often packaged like self-improvement. So as neurodivergents, here's where we can start. Very, very small. Very, very small. Because when we're already overwhelmed, anything like a full yoga poses routine can just become one more thing that's added to our never-ending to-do list. So to start small, when you catch that voice and you know the voice, we stop. We slow down. We don't argue with the voice, because arguing with this voice in our head that's causing us harm, it gives that voice more energy and more space to grow, right? So we pause, we put one hand on our belly or one hand on our heart, whatever feels best to you. And we just pause and we just breathe. And as we're taking that breath and just that moment, this is just a few seconds. And it's not to make the thoughts go away. And it's not to replace these thoughts with something positive or something fake. It's just to stop and say to ourselves, I have a human body. I am a person and I am not a project. And then after we pause, we can ask ourselves one question. Am I treating myself like a person, like a human person? Or am I treating myself like a project, something that needs to be optimized or hacked? And the answer to that question usually tells us everything that we need to know. If that voice is pushing you, if it's telling you to fix, to track your whatever, tracking things, to correct things, if it's turning you as a human person into something to manage, don't argue with that voice. Just notice it. We need to name it when it's happening and recognize that this is harm. This is turning what was like an old protection into punishment. And when we can slow down and we can notice it and we can name it, that is the beginning of us practicing Ahimsa, practicing yoga, and the start of treating ourselves like people again instead of projects. Because yoga does not ask us to fix ourselves. True yoga does not ask us to fix ourselves. It asks, one of the very first thing it asks of us to do is stop harming ourselves. Come back into relationship with ourselves as people, not projects, not our diagnosis, not a list of things to optimize or hack. A relationship to ourselves as human beings, as people. So if this brought something up for you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Just what's one thing that your inner critic says to you where it kind of disguises itself as accountability, but really just keeps you stuck in the same harmful loops over and over again? I will share mine first in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.